Imagine you are a king. Your neighbors are violent. Raiders move through the land. Armies clash. Empires rise. Empires fall in blood and fire. But you have no army, no soldiers, no cavalry, no fortifications. And yet, every king in the region fears you. Every community obeys you. Your word is law across hundreds of miles. How? That's the story of the Nri Kingdom, and honestly, it might be the strangest political system in human history. Here's what you're going to discover in the next 15 minutes. There was a kingdom in what is now southeastern Nigeria, one that lasted over 1,000 years, a kingdom that produced bronze artwork so technically advanced, archaeologists refused to believe it was African in origin when they first found it, a kingdom that banned slavery while the slave trade raged around it, a kingdom that sent unarmed priests, not warriors, as its ambassadors, and those priests were obeyed. But this story doesn't end in triumph. It ends in something far more devastating than military defeat, because eventually, something came along that the Nri had no ritual for, no ceremony to cleanse it, no spiritual authority to counter it. And when that happened, 1,000 years of power collapsed in a generation. Stay with me, because this is one of the most extraordinary and most forgotten stories in world history. To understand the Nri, you have to understand where they came from. Around the 9th or 10th century CE, historians place the founding of the Nri Kingdom at approximately 948 AD. A people living in the dense forests and fertile plains of Igbo land, in what is now southeastern Nigeria, began building something unusual. The founding figure in Nri oral tradition is a man called Nri. According to tradition, Nri descended from the sky, sent by the supreme deity Chukwu, and landed near the confluence of two rivers. He was, in the telling of the Nri people themselves, the father of civilization in this region. He taught them farming. He established order. He made the earth yield. Now, is this literal? Of course not. But here's what's fascinating about origin myths. They reveal values. And what the Nri valued wasn't military glory, it wasn't conquest. It was sacred authority, the right to define what is holy and what is abomination. And that distinction between holy and abomination was about to become the most powerful political tool in West Africa. The first Eze Nri, the sacred king, was named Ifikwanem, and when he came to power, he made a declaration that would define the next 1,000 years. He declared that certain acts were nso, taboo, abomination, pollution of the earth, murder, human sacrifice, the twin births that neighboring communities feared and sometimes killed, certain crimes against hospitality. And here was the genius. Only the Eze Nri could cleanse these abominations. Only his ritual specialists called Nri men could travel to a community, perform the cleansing ceremony, and restore the spiritual order. You see where this is going? If only you can fix the problem, you never lose relevance. Now here's the part that sounds almost impossible. The Nri men, these ritual specialists sent out from the kingdom, traveled unarmed. No weapons, no military escort, just sacred authority and the ritual objects of their office, and they were received everywhere. Why would neighboring communities, some of them violent, some of them much larger, accept the authority of unarmed priests from the Nri Kingdom? Because the Nri had made themselves indispensable. Think about it like this. If you believe that a murder in your village has polluted the earth, that your crops will fail, your women will have difficult births, your community will suffer, unless a ritual specialist performs a cleansing ceremony, then you need that specialist desperately. The Nri didn't conquer communities, they made communities spiritually dependent on them, and the Nri expanded this system brilliantly. Over centuries, they trained and dispatched more Nri men. They traveled as far as the Delta region, across the Niger River, into communities hundreds of miles from the Nri heartland, each one carrying the authority of the Eze Nri, each one able to cleanse, to bless, to consecrate. And what did the Nri ask in return? Titles, tribute, acknowledgement of Nri's spiritual supremacy. But this rapid expansion came with a hidden cost, and the Nri were smart enough to know it. Because a system built on spiritual authority only works if people believe, and belief, unlike an army, is fragile. So the Nri did something remarkable to reinforce their power. They created things of such beauty that people could not doubt the divine favor behind them. Around the 9th century CE, in a place called Igbo-Ukwu, Nri artisans were producing bronze work of astonishing complexity. Vessels cast using the lost wax method, intricate ceremonial objects decorated with insects, rope patterns, geometric designs of extraordinary precision. When a British archaeologist named Thurston Shaw excavated these objects in the 1940s, he initially struggled to believe they were indigenous. The technical sophistication was that advanced. Carbon dating eventually confirmed they were produced around 850 to 900 CE, predating comparable work from Ife, Benin, or anywhere else in the region. This was the Nri broadcasting power, not in soldiers, in art, in ritual objects so beautiful they carried their own argument. Look what divine favor produces. But their biggest advantage was still coming, and it wasn't bronze. At the height of their influence, roughly the 12th through 16th centuries, the Nri Kingdom had achieved something almost paradoxical. They were, by any conventional measure, not powerful. They had no standing army. Their king rarely left his sacred precinct. Their territory, in the pure geographic sense, was modest. And yet, the Eze Nri was the only figure in the entire region who could consecrate certain titles. Powerful men, warriors, traders, local kings traveled to Nri to receive the Ozo title. This was the mark of legitimate authority. Without it, you were strong, perhaps, but you were not sanctioned. The Nri had made themselves the gatekeepers of legitimate power itself, and then they did something even more extraordinary. The Nri Kingdom formally opposed slavery and human sacrifice within their sphere of influence. Let that land for a moment. This was a region where the transatlantic slave trade would later become catastrophically active, where powerful states derived enormous wealth from reading, capturing, and selling human beings. And the Nri, this unarmed kingdom of ritual specialists, maintained a formal ideological opposition to it. Historian Elizabeth Isechi and others who have studied Nri governance note that the kingdom provided sanctuary. Communities under Nri ritual protection had certain protections from slave raiding that others did not. This was a moral claim backed by spiritual authority, and for a long time, it held. There was no challenger that could unmake it. Military empires came and went around them. The Benin Kingdom rose to extraordinary power. Trade networks shifted. But the Nri endured, because you cannot defeat a ritual monopoly with an army. You can't kill a spiritual claim. Or so they thought. By the 18th century, the world around the Nri was changing in ways their entire framework had not prepared for. The Atlantic slave trade had exploded, and it was doing something to the spiritual ecology of the region that was deeply corrosive to Nri authority. Here is the mechanism, and it's subtle but devastating. The Nri system worked because communities wanted cleansing, because they believed that abomination, murder, certain violations of sacred law, created genuine spiritual pollution that needed ritual remedy. But the slave trade was rewiring what communities valued. Communities that raided and sold captives were prospering. They had European goods, they had guns. The old spiritual sanctions, the fear of nso, of pollution, of divine punishment, were competing with a very visible, very material reward of doing the thing the Nri said was wrong. And then the Nri faced something it truly had no answer for: the British. The British colonial presence, expanding rapidly across the Niger Delta and into the interior during the 19th century, didn't just bring military force. That the Nri could have survived. Many kingdoms survived military pressure by becoming useful, by adapting. No, the British brought something far more dangerous to the Nri. They brought an alternative metaphysical framework. Christian missionaries arrived. They told communities that the spiritual pollution the Nri managed, it wasn't real, that the cleansing ceremonies were superstition, that the sacred authority of the Eze Nri was invented, not divinely ordained. And this time, the Nri had no ritual response. You cannot perform a cleansing ceremony on doubt. The end came with brutal speed. In 1911, the British conducted what they called the Eze Nri Expedition, a military operation into the Nri heartland. The Eze Nri at the time, a man named Eze Nri Obalik, was forced to formally submit to British authority. Think about what that moment meant. For over 1,000 years, the Nri had been the one who conferred legitimacy, the one who cleansed abominations, the one before whom powerful men prostrated themselves to receive sacred titles. And now he was being told by men with rifles who had traveled from an island on the other side of the world that his authority was null. The Nri men, those unarmed priests who had traveled freely across the region for centuries, found their reception changing. Communities that had paid tribute and sought ritual services were no longer certain those services carried weight. New courts, British courts, were resolving disputes that the Nri had once handled through ritual. The economic logic of the system collapsed, tribute dried up, the sacred title system was disrupted. And without material support, without a military fallback, without any alternative source of coercive power, the Nri Kingdom had nothing left to sustain itself on. The Nri title continued. It exists to this day, but the political and spiritual sovereignty it once represented, the 1,000-year monopoly on ritual legitimacy, was gone. A kingdom that had survived every military threat, every rival empire, every political upheaval for over a millennium was undone by disbelief. Here is the question historians and anthropologists still argue about. Was the Nri system a genuine moral project? A kingdom that achieved peace, banned slavery, and provided sanctuary through principled spiritual governance? Or was it a sophisticated system of ideological control, using manufactured spiritual dependency to extract tribute without the cost of maintaining an army? The honest answer is probably both, and that might be what makes it so human. What's not debated is the achievement. A polity that lasted over 1,000 years, never built an army, produced extraordinary art, and maintained influence across a vast region through the sheer force of an idea. That is, by any measure, one of the most remarkable political experiments in human history. But here's the twist, the thing that lingers. The Nri Kingdom was conquered in 1911, but the Nri institution was never abolished. It simply lost its coercive spiritual authority. And in communities across Igbo land today, the memory of Nri ritual, Nri law, and Nri sacred geography is not gone. It lives in titles, in ceremonies, in the way certain things are still called by Nri names. A kingdom without walls or soldiers left marks that outlasted the armies that erased it. So here is what I want you to think about. The most durable empires in history, the ones that actually shaped how people think, speak, and organize their lives, weren't always the ones with the biggest armies. Sometimes the most lasting power is the kind you can't see. What does that say about power? And what does it say about us that we so rarely talk about the Nri? Drop your thoughts below, because I genuinely want to know.